Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, there's at least one person here. I hope that wasn't super confusing. I'll just give it a minute before so that people can switch over. I really apologize for that. But I spent a lot of time on these slides. Can I just make sure that everybody can hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up or a comment that the sound is okay? And I'll go ahead and get started. Make sure we're allowing comments. There are so many options here. I have to say, I feel like Zoom is a little bit easier. Let's try this. There we go. Okay. So I've allowed viewers to message. So if you guys can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up or throw a comment into the comments section? And then as soon as I get confirmation that you all can hear me, I will go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. If I could just get a hi, something like that would be great. Oh, good. Okay, wonderful. Well, hello. My name is Holden Svirsky, and today I will be presenting the Pet Professional Guild's free website resource, the petrescueresource.com. And in particular, we're going to talk about dog playgroups. So real quick about me, I've been working professionally in animal welfare for a little over a decade now. Prior to becoming pro, spent a lot of time volunteering in the shelter and rescue world. I am not the only person who worked on this project. There are lots and lots of folks who contributed. These people are some of the other main contributors of the petrescueresource.com and want to make sure that they get due credit. So what does this resource cover? A lot, actually. This project has been about a little over 2 years in the making, and lots of volunteer hours. So we discuss why playgroups, why are they important, why should we even bother doing them, all of that. What do you need? Things like play space, gear and safety equipment, staffing, roles and responsibilities, as well as lots of protocols and policies. Accepting risk. So anytime we get dogs together, animals with pointy teeth together, when there's more than one, there are certainly inherent risks in deciding to run playgroups. So we thoroughly discuss that. Getting people on board. When we're talking about risk, we have to make sure that everybody is on board with some of these risks. So talking points for medical staff, volunteers, management. And then the nuts and bolts of actually running playgroups, protocols for selecting dogs and making appropriate matches, putting a really good group together. Who is going to be a great match for one dog isn't necessarily going to be a great match for another dog. And then the actual policies and standards of practice that we provide for introducing dogs, and there are plenty. And then, of course, managing play. How do you referee a play group And particularly, how do you manage play without the use of aversive measures? And then we have a whole bunch of forms and documentation. And then this is really just one section of the whole site. The other part of the site, oops, we have a whole section just on jumpy, mouthy dogs, particularly those who are sheltered or in foster environments. Lots of management strategies, step-by-step training plans, videos, and while, of course, this website is intended for the shelter and rescue world, it can be very helpful for just an own dog. So definitely go check it out. And then we also have a cat section that is not up yet, but will hopefully be coming soon. So let's get back to the why. Why playgroups? Why are we going to spend time, money, effort, use our precious man hours to even think about running them? I'd like to discuss the 5 freedoms of animal welfare. And if you have worked in shelter and rescue, you will be very familiar with the 5 freedoms, but I think it's sort of important for everyone, and even certainly trainers, but even just folks who own dogs to know what these 5 freedoms are. The 5 freedoms were originally defined by the United Kingdom's Farm Animal Welfare Council in the 1960s. They've been updated, and they're understood to apply to the welfare of all animals now, not just livestock. The 5 freedoms define animal welfare, and you can find them on websites, and in the United Kingdom, they are enshrined into law. So what are they? The first is freedom from hunger and thirst. Kind of a no-brainer. Ready access to water, a diet to maintain health and vigor. The second is freedom from discomfort by providing an appropriate environment. And this typically applies to enclosure size, important for an animal to have an appropriate size enclosure. And this also is enshrined into law in many countries. Freedom from pain, injury, and disease by prevention or rapid diagnosis and treatment. And then the fourth, and the next 2 are the ones that I'm really going to be focusing on, but the fourth is freedom to express normal behavior by providing sufficient space, proper facilities, and appropriate company of the animal's own kind. So isolation from members of our own species would not be providing this freedom. And then, of course, we have the 5th freedom, which is freedom from fear and distress by ensuring conditions and treatment which avoid mental suffering. And as you look at 4 and 5, you can certainly make arguments that some things you could do to provide freedom number 4 may, in fact, inhibit providing freedom number 5, vice versa. So when making decisions about care for and welfare for animals, we really need to sort of be constantly referring to these and seeing, are we doing the best we can in all 5 of these areas? So with playgroups, we also have a whole host of other benefits aside from providing this 4th and possibly 5th freedom. Shelters and rescues are super understaffed. I don't know, of course, if anyone out there right now has worked in a shelter or a rescue environment, but it's not a lot of people, hanging out, having extra long lunch breaks. People who work in shelter and rescues tend to skip lunch breaks. It's hard work, and it's constant. And we're always struggling with limited staffing, underfunding, not enough volunteers. So with playgroups, we find that we can actually do more with less people. We can reduce the number of staff required per dog outing. So instead of 5 people taking out 5 individual dogs, we might be able to have 2 people run a playgroup of 5 dogs. We can increase the number of dogs who can enjoy out of kennel time at one moment. And this can also be really helpful to cleaning. I found that in the last shelter environment that I worked in, we would take out just a whole room of kennels if the dogs were appropriate for that particular play group, and then that entire area could be cleaned really efficiently, saving tons and tons of time for the kennel attendants. And then this is a big one. We can also reduce the time spent managing or modifying behavior problems. This is big. So I'm a trainer, and working in the shelter environment, I would be happy to have 20 minutes with a particular dog in a day. Depending on the population size, being able to do dedicated desensitization, counter conditioning for everybody who needs it is just impossible. There's just not enough time. And so, how can we reduce behavior problems in the first place? And we found that playgroups can be a really effective way to do that. They also provide, of course, environmental enrichment, exercise, and then, of course, that fourth freedom, access to other dogs. We can also decrease lengths of stay. The length of stay, or LOS, as the sort of shelter jargon goes, is an important metric in determining how successful the shelter is for animal welfare in general. We certainly hear super sad stories about dogs who are in shelters for months, sometimes years. And then anecdotally at Animal Rescue Foundation, we found that dogs who were co-housed with other dogs, with another dog or two, were seen as more desirable to adopters, particularly potential adopters who already had another dog in their home. When 60% of US households have dogs already, remember that a sheltered dog who must be, quote, the only pet in the home just has a much lower chance of being adopted. That takes away a big chunk of their adoption pool. We also find that playgroups can really help the marketability of dogs, both to potential adopters, or if they're run in municipal shelters, to market these dogs to rescues. So when doing intake, which I did for a number of years, if I saw a video of a dog playing well with another dog, that's the dog I want to bring back to the rescue, because I know that I can get that dog into a home very, very quickly. And then we also have the potential to create a benefit to the dog's kennel presentation. Are they bouncing off the walls when somebody walks by their kennel? Are they reacting to any sort of stimulus that goes by? Playgroups can certainly decrease the risk of developing or maintaining behavior problems that can result from what we know as kennel stress, this accumulated stress due to a lack of enrichment and exercise. And you can get to know your dogs better. Let's find out about them. These playgroups can give a really unique window into dogs' personalities, how dogs act with other dogs, what their behavior is with other dogs can often be vastly different than it is with strangers or with veterinary staff, or with the particular person who performs intake. So we can gain a lot of valuable information, like how the dog might fare at a dog park. This will take the emotional and financial burden off of prospective adopters to hire a trainer to let them know, hey, I want a dog that I can take to the dog park. Is this the one? That can get very expensive. And then we can find out about safety. And we'll talk a little more about this, but most fights do end non-injuriously. However, if a dog is likely to gravely injure another dog, this information should really be gathered at the shelter. This information should be gathered prior to putting a dog into a home with folks who, just want a pet. They're not professional dog trainers. They are not veterinary behaviorists. We really want to find this stuff out beforehand. And this speaks to something that I'm very passionate about, which is transparency in shelter and rescue. It is just so important to get the most and best information that we can so that we can make appropriate matches, so that we can prepare potential adopters for, set them up with training classes, or simply let them know, hey, we need to, beef up your management, or, what can we do to support you, really. And this transparency really can save lives, not just canine lives, but in the case of dogs who are potentially dangerous in the shelter system, we can also save human lives when we gather information and are transparent. And we can improve the shelter or rescue's public image. I don't know many people who don't like to see dogs playing and having a jolly, wonderful time. Um, in Animal Rescue Foundation, again, whenever I held play groups, our marketing staff would clear their schedule to come out and take video because they found that on their social media, these were the pieces that got the most views, frankly. And these animals went into homes really, really quickly. When people are removed from this process, the public comes up with a lot of funny ideas about what goes on in shelters behind closed doors. So again, both transparency and showing dogs that are friendly and having fun can definitely help bring people in. Okay, so let's move on to risks because they exist. And, while we all fall upon a continuum of bias here in terms of dog social behavior, I do want to point these out. So we certainly have injuries to dogs. Dogs can injure each other during play. We also have injuries to staff and volunteers. We have the risk of redirected bites. We have dogs who are going to be running really fast, can certainly knock someone off their feet. And then we have negative outcomes that result from possibly these injuries or playgroup incidents. And then another important risk to take into account is the associated upset and conflict when there are negative outcomes, because that can be very, very hard on the human population who work or volunteer for shelters. And then, of course, we have risk of disease spread. On the other hand, there are risks when you make the choice to forego playgroups. These are also risks, and these are the ones I really want to think about here. So we can unknowingly adopt dogs to the general public who are unsafe with other dogs. And again, not only can this be a heartbreaking scenario, it can also create some sticky scenarios just liability-wise. So without having this information, that is certainly a risk that a shelter or rescue would be taking. We can get behavioral decline, sometimes known as kennel stress, including barrier frustration. And this decline is associated with a lack of access to other dogs and, of course, their freedom to express normal social behavior. And then behavioral decline, again, associated with kennel stress and insufficient physical exercise. When you are locked in a cage for 23 hours a day, certainly your behavior can change, and it's typically not for the better. So again, I'll be discussing a lot of what this means, barrier frustration, in this scenario here. So what is it? Barrier frustration. It's really important, and not a lot of people think about it. We hear things like aggression, reactivity. So I really want to zero in and define this. And I will give you first, my clicker's a little slow here, some human examples. So this is Beatlemania. We have some Beatles fans who are showing all kinds of crazy emotions, pushing against the Bobby officers here. These women, we do not believe are afraid of the Beatles, but they're quite frustrated that they are unable to access them. And then everybody's been in this scenario, traffic, right? We might have, incredibly super mild-mannered, polite people who, when stuck in traffic, become real jerks, become quite aggressive, actually, honking the horn, flipping the bird, otherwise engaging in road rage. Again, not because they are afraid of other people in cars or even that they wish them harm. They're frustrated. So we have this frustration-based behavior. So when we're talking about dogs, here are some examples of this barrier frustration, also known as reactivity. And for your benefit, because it's loud, there is no sound in this video. So we've seen that. Even if you haven't been in a kennel environment, you have likely seen dogs barking and growling and lunging at each other on leash just in your day-to-day life, or maybe you even have a reactive dog. So let's define this a little bit further. What is it? Barrier frustration is barking, lunging, growling, and or snarling due to the frustration of being on a leash or behind a barrier like a gate, a fence, or a window. The barrier prevents the dog from accessing other dogs for normal social rituals. Leashes and barriers are non-existent in sort of primitive society, right? Where dogs could just freely access each other all the time. We have created these barriers, and they can then result in emotions of frustration that wouldn't be present if the barrier was not present. And here's the thing, is that barrier frustrated dogs often play well with other dogs when they're off leash. And as a dog trainer who takes these cases on a regular basis, I hear this all the time. He's fine at the dog park, but when we see another dog, when we're on a leash walk across the street, he becomes a growling, snarling, lunging, barking mess. Again, these dogs also don't just play well typically, they love play. And so dogs who enjoy play this much that they do so well with other dogs, we again need to remember that that access to other dogs is a really big part of their overall welfare. And again, this behavior occurs very frequently in shelters because we have barriers everywhere, right? We want to keep everybody safe. And so we put everybody in single kennels or in cages or in crates. And so, that's a heck of a lot of barriers right there. So here is an example of how a dog, this white dog here, looks completely different in a kennel environment when a dog walks by, and then in a play group with another well-matched dog with a similar play style. So if you had just seen, and I'll play this again, because if you had just seen this dog, you might say, oh gosh, no way would I adopt that dog to take home to my Fluffy. He would want to kill him. But this dog actually has all kinds of great play skills that we might not have otherwise discovered if we hadn't put him into a play group. Oh, I don't know why that played again. Okay, but how do you know? How do you know that he just wants to play? That that's the reason for his barking? In the absence of knowledge of a play history, which is very common in shelter dogs. We get dogs, we have no, they were found somewhere, tied to something. We might not have any information from their former home. So you just don't know. And it's impossible to tell. Topographically, barrier frustrated behavior looks, sounds, and seems almost exactly the same as, say, fear-based aggressive behavior. And even for a really experienced trainer or an ethology expert, it's impossible to eyeball this with any real accuracy. And I've been running playgroups now for years. Again, have been an animal welfare professional for about a decade, and I couldn't tell you. I couldn't always tell you. I can make a guess, of course, but I can tell you that I'm often wrong. So you just don't know. And without this knowledge, what we do is we make some pretty important decisions. When we don't have any evidence, what happens to these dogs who are snarling, growling, and lunging at other dogs, either from their kennel or on a leash? We put a label on them. This is a dog aggressive dog. Or this is a reactive dog. I realize that that word, which has sort of gained popularity in recent years, is used because it's certainly not that it's inaccurate. It's actually, I would say, probably more accurate. It sounds a little softer, but the public's quickly catching on that it can also be sort of code for something, and they can sort of draw their own conclusions on what that is. We might say this dog's got to be the only dog in the home. And again, when 60% of households in the United States already have a dog in their home, that is a huge chunk of people who are unable to take this dog, who are unable to consider this dog. We might say this dog can't go to play groups. They're aggressive. There's no way we're going to put them in a play group. And if we're wrong, again, if it's just barrier frustration and this is the type of dog who actually loves play, that's a big welfare concern for them, that they will be unable to access dogs day in, day out when this is really the one thing that they are really looking for, the one thing that they're interested in, the one real motivator and possibly way in to help this dog. This can be devastating. We might, for shelters who are well resourced, this choice can it can be life-saving or it can cause further harm, sort of depending on the quality of the trainer. Or if we're really lucky, we have a trainer on staff or a volunteer who can begin a process of desensitization and counter conditioning. So just to sort of review, these things can be, of course, not can actually be barriers to a dog's adoption, and that can be a life or death deal. If a dog declines behaviorally in a shelter, if their behavior gets worse and worse and worse, the chances for a positive outcome, that they will find a home, or that they aren't suffering day in, day out, are very, very, low and then high when we just increase their isolation. Again, if you're wrong and this dog loves other dogs when off leash, you have just removed one of their 5 freedoms. The one thing that could save this dog's sanity is being withheld from them. And certainly we all know of dogs who have been sent to punitive and aversive based, boot camps, and can quite frankly end up a behavioral mess, either learned helplessness, sort of at best, or again, just a behavior decline, and the dog is, declared, an unsavable sort of aggressive dog, and this can end in euthanasia. And then a trainer being able to do desensitization and counter conditioning. Now, I am certainly do a ton of this in my own work, so I am very pro DSCC. However, It is extremely time consuming. And when you only have one trainer on staff, if you're lucky to have that, and you have half a population of dogs in this category, there's no way everybody is going to get the attention that they deserve. And furthermore, for desensitization to work, we certainly need to protect the dog from being exposed to their particular trigger so that they're not constantly being exposed over their threshold for stress. And that's nigh on impossible in a shelter environment. And so desensitization really isn't taking place. You can try, and I certainly have, but when there's this, 23 hours a day that you're not working on a desensitization and counter conditioning plan with this dog, they're being exposed to the thing that stresses them. So with the pet rescue resource, what we're doing is creating more options than the ones that I just listed. So we have an on-leash quick introduction method. We have an on-leash using food SOP, and then we have an off-leash SOP. And these are very detailed. So which method you choose will depend on a number of factors. You're going to need to consider what supplies you have, what space you have available. Do you already have a number of conflict kits? Do you have a fully enclosed play area? Do you have leashes? Do you have the food that is necessary? It's also going to depend on your level of risk aversion, and everybody is going to fall along a spectrum. And there's no right or wrong answers here. Everybody's different, and so everybody has a bias. And so, this is why the website really goes into how to start opening up these discussions so we can assess our own biases and find out, hey, am I willing to push my needle a little bit? Or nope, this is too much for me, so we're going to try this other option. And these discussions, again, should be had not just with staff and not just with management, but really with all stakeholders. Have you completed basket muzzle desensitization? Do you have a dog that you believe may be aggressive toward other dogs and you don't know what their mouth is like? We do have very detailed plans and video for desensitizing a dog to a basket muzzle. And while this takes time, it takes a heck of a lot less time than desensitization and counter conditioning to a stressful trigger. So we definitely, and I found that basket muzzles as a safety device, when assessing, hey, does the dog have any play skills, can be a really great way to find out more information about a unknown quantity dog. And have you taken the time to pre-train some other possibly simple behaviors? A watch me, a let's go, a recall, positive interrupters. If I squeak a squeaker and give you snacks, and then I squeak a squeaker when you're investigating another dog, will you come over to me? All of those things can be very helpful and will inform which of these SOPs you choose. I do want to put out a disclaimer because I don't have time to go through the entire site, but safety protocols should absolutely be well established prior to attempting any of these introductions. You will want to review on the website, what is normal play? What am I looking for? What are play skills? How do I know that the dog is enjoying this? What specific behaviors am I looking for? When do I intervene? Because the timing of this is important. How do I intervene? What do I use? And again, the Pet Rescue Resource being a product of the Pet Professional Guild, we do not endorse the use of aversive measures to manage play. Consent tests, very, very important skill to have because, again, humans come at playgroups and watching dogs play with a wide spectrum of bias. The dogs might be having a great time, but you're not sure. You can do a consent test. Someone else is a little bit nervous. Hey, let's check. Let's ask the dogs if they are enjoying this interaction. Rotating dogs into playgroups. We discuss how to do that and best practices. And monitoring leashes, really, really important detail there. And then using toys and food, lots of ins and outs there. You will certainly want to, have some information about whether the dog has a history of guarding either of these things before you decide which method to use. And breaking up fights. And we have a very detailed list of how and when to break up a fight and what things should be used. And again, all of these things, what methods are used to break up a fight is going to depend on what the shelter and rescue is personally comfortable with using. And what training has already been done, risk aversion, all those kinds of biases. So all of this stuff really needs to be very well established prior to attempting any of the introductions that I'm about to show you. So here we have the first option, on leash as quickly as possible. This is not easy to do. It's a dance. Sorry, I don't know why it doesn't want to click through. Okay, devil's in the details here. The dogs need to meet as quickly as possible. Again, this is a barrier frustrated dog. If there's tension on the leash, that barrier frustration is going to click in, and that frustration is not going to help the meeting go well. So the leashes need to be loose. You might need to run. You might need to run at a full sprint to keep up with the dog, depending on how far away the dogs are from one another, in order to keep that leash loose. Because the more tension on the leash, the more you're going to get that false positive for aggression. And the meeting may or may not go very well from there. Dancing around the dog, super important. And you saw that in the video. We sort of circle around each other. And we really want to keep an eye not just on the dogs and on each other, but also on the leashes. Being ready and quick with untangling. I am sure that anyone who owns a dog and has met another dog on leash has had that scenario, because what's the normal social behavior when dogs meet each other? They circle each other. It's nose to butt typically. And so leashes can get tangled very, very quickly. And again, if there's any tension on the leash, the dog may again become frustrated. Here we have our on leash using food SOP. So Kelly here is dropping warmed up meatballs. Oh, he got a little surprised. Kind of a slow roll up. We're distracting. The brindle dog is what we're going to consider our helper dog, not the barrier frustrated dog. Barrier frustrated dog is the tan dog. And so by using food, we get a little bit of a slower approach where we don't quite have to run. We're tossing food. We're able to approach, again, nose to rear end, get some information there, and then start to assess body language and to see, is there play? Notice how loose she's keeping the leash, but we are always ready to separate. Again, details matter. So we want our helper dog, the dog that is not barrier frustrated, that we already know is quite friendly and playful with other dogs, or perhaps neutral, but certainly is a good match for a dog who's super frustrated. We really don't want to do a head-to-head, face-to-face meeting. That can get very tense quickly. And then we are pulling out the big guns in terms of food. These are not training treats. These are, we're going to the grocery store, we're getting frozen, pre-made meatballs, and we're taking the time to warm them up beforehand so that they're just extremely high value and actually work to slow down a dog a little bit as we're coming up to the other dog's rear end. And then we're gonna do a sniff and drop. So we're going to let the dog sort of smell this meatball, if that's what you're using, and then drop it on the ground. Again, slowing their pace a little bit. And we also really want to avoid hand feeding in these scenarios, which can become tense because the risk of a redirected bite will increase anytime we have our hands near dogs' mouths. Another thing is, if we don't know about this dog's chance for resource guarding, we want perhaps a helper, a volunteer, to pick up the uneaten meatballs. If the dog wasn't eating the meatballs on the way up or there's some left over, we want someone kind of on that job so that they can pick them up prior to dropping leashes, releasing the dogs to play, so that we don't get, okay, we have, barrier frustration has been taken care of, but now we've got resource guarding. We don't want that to happen. Again, there's going to be a dance around the dogs. Be ready to move. We need folks who have done this and practiced really, and practiced with fake dogs, or even just getting a chance to sort of dance around. Make sure that they are willing and able to move quickly. And then as soon as we see playful behavior, if we are in an enclosed area, we're going to just drop those leashes. Once play breaks out, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we don't reintroduce barrier frustration, because it's tough to keep tension completely off the leash. We can certainly do our best, but the best way to do that would be to drop the leash. And then finally, we have our off-leash SOP. So this dog has their leash held. Again, it's kept loose. That's the helper dog that you're seeing now. The barrier frustrated dog or question mark dog is going to be coming in from that airlock. And as soon as they're inside, the leashes are dropped so that there is zero tension whatsoever. We can approach each other in a species normal way. Again, you see the circling, nose to rear, and then everything seems to be really chill. Okay, details about this. The intro's got to be blind. If your dog can see through the fence and they're on a leash, again, now you've got two barriers. So in that video, you noticed that the airlock, you couldn't see through it. If you have a shelter yard that does have a fence that you can see easily through, one thing that I would do quite frequently was take 3 minutes, get a bunch of bed sheets and cover up that visual access, because again, we're trying to reduce the frustration here. And if the dog can see another dog and there's a barrier present, then again, we may get a false positive for aggression. We're going to monitor the leashes closely, especially after you've dropped them. You are keeping your eye on the ball because if things go south, which they sometimes do, you need to be ready to pick up that leash, which is the best way to separate dogs at first. If we get tense body language, stiff tails, closed mouths, wide eyes, ears pinned or very far forward, then we're going to attempt to use a positive interrupter. Happy talk, squeaker, woo woo woo, whatever it is, we're going to see, can we help diffuse this with something positive at first. We are not going to start any of the fight protocols before a fight starts. And this is key here. And you can probably already see below, the measures listed there are certainly aversive. They are only to be used once a fight is already in progress and an actual fight, not just I feel uncomfortable about this play or this is rough play. No, it is 110% everybody is sure this is a fight. And then we have some options. And everybody's going to sort of have their biases on what works best for them. I certainly do. But I find that if the dogs are dragging leashes, the easiest way to separate them is to pick up the dragging leashes. And that's also the least aversive way. Let's just pick up their leashes from the ground, move them away from each other. Also a little bit safer. We have water options listed on the site, and there's certainly a bunch of different types. Citronella spray and how to use that. Handstanding or wheelbarrowing a dog. And we also offer a break stick option and then noises, which I find are really the most aversive. So, talking about fights, of course, gets everyone's heart rate up a little bit. So I want to just kind of step back for a second and just provide a little bit of a reality check for everybody. Sadly, we don't have a ton of research on this. I found one very interesting study that I cited in a recent article in Barks from the Guild from November, where dogs were housed in groups and there was really zero human intervention at all. People did not go in there. They did not put their hands on the dogs. They were observed. 91% of social confrontations between the dogs housed together were settled by the use of behavior rituals. Zero injuries in 91% of fights. And then anecdotally, I can certainly tell you that in 10 plus years of my own shelter work, where dogs were routinely co-housed and also completely unmonitored by humans from 7 p.m. when we closed to 7 a.m. when we opened, I've never had a fatality. I've never arrived in the morning to a dog needing to be stitched up by the shelter veterinarian. Not once. This is really about practice. Practice, practice, practice. If you never do one, you're not going to get better at holding play groups. You really, really need to start with where you're comfortable. Sometimes that's with small dogs because we see the same behavior in small dogs that we do in big dogs. There's just a little bit less risk if the dog is a Chihuahua. So getting, your feet wet, I always think a great place to start would be a small dog group. And just as an aside that I sort of forgot to put in here, there's tons in the website that is not in this presentation, but size definitely matters in making matches. So when I say small dogs, I mean all the dogs are small or within 50% of each other's body weight. But you gotta just do it. You gotta do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And the more you do it, the better and more skilled you get at reading dog body language, starting to see the signs that things might be going south. You will find out, what intervention is the least aversive and most effective if it's needed. You get good at performing consent tests. And it's also just really fun. These were the best days in the shelter, were playgroup days. You would see people come out of the woodwork to come and see dogs play and having a grand old time. Um, there's, there's a lot of sadness in the shelter and rescue world, and play is the best antidote to compassion fatigue that I have ever found. And just lowering stress levels, getting better behavior, removing the need to do dedicated desensitization and counter conditioning, slow slogs with this particular group of dogs. Again, life-saving both for canines and for humans. It's just really can be just a wonderful, wonderful time. Oh, I don't know why we're not clicking through. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I apologize so much for my technical glitches at the end. Again, I obviously need more practice with Facebook Live. I will